Hello, Vasco. So I have looked at this model that you provided yesterday, and I prepared a list of 14 points about the mistakes that 3D artists made on this model. So let's start. So first of all, let's start from the naming on the files and textures. There is an unofficial naming convention about naming objects in actual 3D package and in exporting files as well. So it means that the all letters should be in lowercase, and all spaces have to be changed to underscore. And have actually logical names for every file. So for example, here we have a polyword like your metaverse, and what is a character 0.1. This is not actually a good approach for naming files. So for example, let's name it like a fox kid hi, and for this one like a fox kid low. In my opinion, this is much better and cleaner naming and logical naming for every files, and as well for textures. So default material, this is not good enough for naming textures. So for example, like kid, it means, or it depends on diffuse or albedo. For this case is diffuse, like a div. This kid normal, and this one kid roughness. Yes, and it would be much more easier for game developers or people that are working like game designers with assets in game engines to find relative textures for relative object. Yes, and the next point is about alpha channel and the type of raster image, the format of raster image. So as I saw, there were none alphas on this model, and so actually we don't need any opacity or alpha channel in textures as well, and it will decrease the size of the raster image tremendously. So for example, as we could see, we have these textures in PNG format with alpha channel, and when we open with Photoshop, for example, and create a new layer and fill layer, for example, with black color, and resave it with in JPEG format, because it's much more heavyweight, and it supports only 8-bit of colors, but it's completely enough for diffuse and albedo textures. When we're talking about normals, yes, it's not enough, because normals have to add a lot of colors and variations to avoid some glitches and artifacts. But for example, for albedo, for roughness, for metalness, for AO, for thickness map, it's completely enough 8-bit and JPEG format because it's less space needed for this kind of texture. For example, let's export the same texture but in JPEG format, and if to compare this PNG 3.3 megabytes and JPEG 1.3 megabytes, it for example 3 times less space needed for the same textures. And actually, when we have a lot of different textures in a scene, so the size really matters. It will decrease the time of draw calls, decrease the size of actual mobile web or PC game actually. So yes, it's a really good option to check every time textures and their sizes and decrease them as if possible actually. So this was a second point. And the third one, let's jump to actually the model, and this is a good practice to position to position model above the scene zero level. So for example, this position is not good enough because when you will import this model to game engine, it will stand like that in the origin, zero origin of the some area or some game engine. And it's a very good practice to every time pose correctly your place correctly your character in the scene. Yeah, this one, what about the positioning? Something like that, maybe like that. Maybe this is a perfect position for the final position for every character. And the fourth point about origins, it's a very good practice to have an origin of every object. If 3D artists decide that this this fox will contains of maybe few objects, it's okay, but it's a good practice to have origin for every object in the center of the scene. So let's do that. As you can see, that we have 4 T's, and every T's had its own origin. It's not a good practice. I will show you why in a minute. So let's apply all origins in the middle of the scene space, in the center of the scene space. And so for example, if we accidentally move some object in different in other positions, so we don't have to place them like that and be accurate. We just have to reset their position to 0, and they will stand exactly where they should be. This is about the origin. This is a very good practice to have the origin in the same 0 position of package scene. So a necessary object. Yes, as you could see, this is amount of object that we have in our scene. This is really huge amount of object for such a small character, and we could decrease them and remove them, and I will show you why. So for example, as you can see, we have completely identical ears and completely identical ears fur, and they have their own texture space in UV map. So this is really redundant because we want to provide as more texture details for every object on the one UV map, and it means to decrease maximum decrease textile density for every object. So if we for example, as you can see, we have a lot of space on the same UV map with actually the same object. So we want to save our space, so we can remove this part, remove ear, remove eye, and for example remove these 2 T's. These 2 we could join to one object, and add to every one of this is mirror modifier. For this one, let's add a mirror modifier as well, and for these 2 objects, let's add a mirror and mirror as well. And as you could see, we save a lot of space in just a minute. I just want to remove 1 minute. Okay. So yeah, we have a lot of extra space for our textures, and we could have much more textile density for the other objects. And yes, and the next one that is really related to UV maps is UV map stretching. And as you could see, we have a lot of stretches in our UV map, this like a green area. We should try to avoid this stretching because we will have possible glitches and maybe artifacts, and stretching in while texturing as well. Of course, there were some instruments, some tools in texturing application that will help us, but anyway, we will have much less problems with texturing while we will create UV maps with more blue surface. Yes, this is important as well. And what is important that there was some instrument, the tool that called average island scale. It will provide the same textile density for every UV island if to compare with 3D model space. So it will provide the same textile density, it means the size on UV map, as it has on the 3D space if to compare with different objects. So let's use it, and as you can see for this part, we have much more space that it actually needed. There were some cases when you actually need to have more textile density for some objects, like for eyes. If we want to zoom object closer and to see some iris or pupil with some details, but in our case, I don't think that we have to do that. So when we use it average island scale, we have to check it every time before packing our islands to have a correct textile density. It means the size of the UV island that is related to the mesh size in the modeling space. So let's undo it for having for avoiding glitches in our texturing for now. And this is what about UV mapping problems that I found. What else? Stretches. I mentioned about stretches, UV textile density, removing unnecessary, it means overlapping objects that are the same. And I saw one more problem, and I don't see a logical reason why the 3D artist did it, about sieving and joining, combining head with body, because these models will be rigged and we will have possible shading. Actually, we will have 100% shading issues because we don't have any shading effect between object and head in this case, and this is one part, and I will show you why this is important. For example, on this one Eagle Teenager model. So let's open rig. Okay, let's clear our transformation for our rig, and as you can see, the head and joined with a body. And when we deform our, for example, in this one, as you could see, we have a great shading. We have a correct mesh deformation between head and body based on a neck, and we could stretch and rotate a neck, and everything will be fine if you will have correct skinning. But with this type approach, I don't see any logical reason why to not join head with a body. Yes, of course, we can avoid with the ears, we can avoid this with the eyes, because they are completely separate meshes, and they were moving and attaching to rig to completely different bones that is not related to one another. And but this one actually could cause a problem. And okay, and the next one, what I want to mention is naming of an object in a scene, as well as naming in files in a folder. So as I mentioned before, all names it's like a unofficial name conventions, but this is average usage in 3D, like to correctly name names in lowercase and with using underscore for about this. Let it be body. This, what is cylinder? Cylinder is another correct name for an object. It's a dish. It's ears. It's ears here. It's head, nose, this, and eyes. Eyes, yes, like this one. And one more thing, this is actually the name of an object. An object, this is some kind of container for a mesh, for textures, for constraints, for as you can see, this is an object and it contains mesh. Actually, this is ears. This is an object that contains a mesh and contains a mesh, contains a texture, and the object has a modifier contains as well. So this is a really good practice when the mesh is using only in this, when this kind of a mesh were used only in this object, you have to rename mesh exactly the same as the object. When, for example, you have a lot of different ears and this kind of mesh will be using in different object, this is not necessary. But when mesh will be used only in this model, you have to rename the mesh exactly the same as an object. Just a minute, please. Yes, like this one. Like this one. As you can see, the mesh has exactly the same name as an object. So we have to repeat for every object as well, because sometimes game developers want to find not an object with a lot of parameters, but only the mesh, the wire. And when it tries he or she tries to find some corresponding and relative mesh, what is the name? This is not a good naming for a mesh as well. So we have to go through every object or write a script for renaming mesh exactly the same list that's an object. This is important as well, in my opinion. So yeah, this stretching, textile density, object naming mesh, node suit, head and body. I told that before, and I want to touch a mesh topology, because as I saw, and as you could see, we have a lot of triangulated mesh and we don't have correct topology. For example, we don't have edge ring or joint ring around the eye, around the mouse, and it will cause some incorrect geo deformation while rigging. Not while rigging, while animation. For example, I will show you on the example like a boy. Okay, like this one. Let's go to edit mode, and as you can see, we have like a solid mode. We have a joint ring around the eyes, around the mouse, and around the neck, and so on and so forth. And in t-shirt we have correct edge loops that have correct topology flow. It's really important for animation and correct deforming while this animation. So please keep this in mind. I mean, this is for this 3D model, because this is important and it will cause problems in the future, possible cause problem in the future. Not in every position, but for example, maybe in this case it's not so important because we wouldn't have any animation deforming on that part or that part, but on some ear brows and my mouse moving and some legs, as you can see, we have a lot of I don't know, this is a really mesh like this was really modeled like that, or this was cause a problem while exporting to FBX format. But yes, this is really important. It's a correct topology and topology flow. And as I saw, we have some unnecessary mesh. In my opinion, this earfure is too big, and maybe I would do that. Just a minute, I remove wireframe. Was only texturing this fure on the ear, but I don't know, I don't saw the reference, so maybe this is a good option, and maybe it should be like that. And for example, if we take a look at the eyes, we have unnecessary vertex over here, and we could remove them. We don't need to model anything that that won't be visible. So even if this eyes will be animated and moving, I think this mesh is completely enough to avoid some empty spaces inside. So yes, this is really important to every time optimize a mesh at the end. Remove unnecessary vertices and faces before UV mapping, and have the same amount of details on. This is not a really super possible sometimes, but for example, if we would see at the nose is really detailed if to compare it with the head and with ears. And as you could see, we have a different type of different size often faces on the mesh. For example, this we have a very small square, we have a very big square if to compare, for example, with this boy. As you can see, if we have a t-shirt, I'll try to model the even size for every face, the same as for head, for hat, for face, and so on and so forth. So this is important as well. Okay, necessary mesh told incorrect, yes, and I want to mention about incorrect eyes highlight. As you can see, we have a really weird highlight from different position on different eyes. It causes because the 3D model or character modeling just mirror it, and this is not a good way to provide highlights on a semi-stylized model, because mostly they like a fake baked from one side only. So how we should fix it, just apply mirror modifier and maybe go to one of the eye and did like that, do like that, and as you can see now we have much better and logical baked highlight on the character iris. And one more point about too blurrish pupil and iris, because if you will see on semi-stylized or maybe even hand paint on stylized character texturing for anime on some games, the iris are very sharp and have really good details without this kind of blurring, because over here with maybe the character modeler did exactly the same like in reference, but sometimes we should avoid this kind of reference examples, because for example I will show you on a character this as well. Just remove, and just a minute. Oh yeah, I just like that, just like I mentioned before, apply and okay, 6 minus 1, yeah, like this one. And as you can see, we should always have faked baked light on the same side. For example, we have some faked light over here, like we have this highlight on the iris, and some star faked light over here that will have faked star highlight over here. And as you can see, we have the sharp pupil and iris corners for this character, and here we have very bluish and not maybe in my opinion they are not a correct way to provide the texturing for eyes in this kind of style texturing. And one more thing about textures UV packing. Yes, because I removed some other parts, we have a lot of empty space, but before we had on the UV map a lot of empty space as well, so we have to pack UV islands as close as possible, for example, to avoid empty space, for example, to get as more texture and detail as possible. So for example, on this character, as you can see, when we measure area, we have almost 88 percent of filling area on the UV map actually. For example, on the eagle as well, and we will see we have super less of empty space. So the less empty space, the more texture details we have on every UV island. This is important as well. So if we return to this model, I just want I told about blurry iris and pupil. And if we talk about texturing as well, I saw that 3D modeler baked really good baked light on the Fox surface. Like we have a baked highlight from above and some baked shadows from below. It looks really good, and it's at some oil paint filter to get some stylish look. But for stylish characters, it's really important to add some kind of gradients that have a completely different, maybe not completely, but different color from the main color to provide some color variation. It's really important. For example, I will show you on an example the same boy. For example, as you can see on the head, on the hair, we have for about 3 different colors. It's darker blue, lighter blue, it's purple color, and maybe some even greens highlight, even reds highlight it has, and it looks really interesting. As well as you can see in the iris, we have a gradient, green from above and blue from below, and some dark blue and light blue in the middle. If we compare to this character, it looks okay, but it not so stylized look. It's not so interesting. So it's really important to add some gradients and color variation on different parts of, for example, on these jeans, we have a green gradient from below to above, and here we have a blue color, light and dark blue color in some pops, and some yellowish highlights even we have, as well as over here you could see in the sneakers we have like blue color in the above, below, and red color, green color above, and some yellowish highlight from the baked light, and it looks more interesting in my opinion. And there is not non-official rule this way to add a lot of color variation for different parts in stylized texturing. So yeah, I think this is it. This is the main problems that I have found in this model. Just let me check one more time about all my points that I add to my Sublime Text. Yes. Okay, I think this is it. If I remember something else, or I will find something else, I will let you know, Vasco. So I hope this maybe small cheat sheet will be useful for your game, for your 3D artist. And yes, So have a great day. Bye.